Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, The Psychology of Change. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers across the Asia-Pacific region. We want this to be an interactive webinar, and I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout. We're excited that we had such a great response for this topic with nearly 900 registrants, but due to that large number, we will keep everyone on mute to avoid any background noise. We do encourage your participation by using the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar side panel. Today's webinar will run for about 60 minutes, and we've allotted time at the end for questions as well. Our facilitator today is Cameron Knott, psychologist and managing director of the Myers-Briggs company. Cameron has extensive experience working with organizations across the Asia-Pacific region in areas of leadership development and executive coaching, team effectiveness, organizational change, and managing a virtual workforce. And today he'll be sharing insights, recent research, and different models, including some of our own, for successfully navigating change. If you'd like to learn more about Cameron or would like to connect with him on LinkedIn, you can look him up by name, or if you have a QR code scanner, you can scan his QR code that appears on the screen on his picture. And with that, I will turn you over to Cameron.
Great, thank you, Kat, and thank you everyone for your time today. Really is great to be with you. I thought I'd start our conversation today talking a bit about the future that we currently find ourselves in. And no, this isn't the coronavirus vaccine, and it's not some kind of statement about social distancing. This is, of course, I think something we can all readily identify. It's a driverless car, and maybe we don't see too many of these driving around our local neighborhood, but we do know that they're part of our current reality. And in fact, they're probably something we identify a little more with Silicon Valley. In fact, this here is a photo I took the last time I was in Silicon Valley and to visit our head office of the Myers-Briggs company. And our office happens to be right next door to Apple's R&D office, where they're developing their own driverless tech. But this here is maybe something that you haven't come across yet. We're now living in a world where we have driverless flying taxis. So I came across this story a few years ago, and Dubai have launched a small fleet of driverless flying taxis. And I was absolutely floored when I came across this. In fact, their aim is that by the year 2023, that around 25 to 30% of travel is to be provided according to this means. So the world that was promised to us through Hollywood and the Jetsons is finally here. The purpose of this introduction is really just to highlight that change is occurring at a rapid rate. And this comes to no surprise to anyone on this webinar. For all of us, our world has changed dramatically to what it was just 3 to 4 months ago. If we think about change in organizations, there are some organizations right now that are struggling because of change. There are those that are succeeding and some which are succeeding through transforming because they're embracing change. Indeed, some organizations see their capability of embracing change as a strategic differentiator. It allows them to remain agile, to innovate, and to grow. So managing change is important. And today we're going to share some models, some examples to help you better manage change in your own organizations. Just a little bit about us, the Myers-Briggs company. So we're very much a mission-driven organization. We've been around for over 65 years, and our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And we look to deliver on this mission through our talent identification and development consultancy services, and also through offering certification in trusted psychometric assessments for those practitioners who want to bring this capability in-house. And as I reflect on our own experience over the last sort of 3 to 4 months, we too have been affected by change, and I've been impressed just with how we've been able to respond in the first sort of 6 weeks. We're able to take a lot of our core programs. We offer these certification programs or consultancy services. Within the period of about a month to 6 weeks, we're able to turn them from in-person offerings to fully virtual offerings. So it's great to to see us be able to do that. It's quite exciting, despite it being a really challenging time for us all. Something else I'd like to share about the Myers-Briggs company, something that we're really proud of, is that we have recently gone through a process of certifying as a B Corp, or a benefit corporation. This is a kind of a global certification that says that as an organisation, we've gone through a process to make sure we meet this criteria, and it's suggesting that we're looking to balance our commercial goals alongside goals that we have for our employees, the community, and the environment. We think it's a really important initiative. There's about 3,000 companies globally that have gone through this process, some larger organizations and some very small organizations. So we think it's really important, and we'd love you to learn more about it. So in terms of today's session, if today was a book, you'd pick up that book, you'd probably look at the front cover, you might look at the back cover and flick through the pages and see some of the main pictures, the diagrams that are in it. And that's exactly what I'd like to do now, is just have a quick flick through so we have an understanding of what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to be talking about change, and as Kat mentioned, we do want this to be an interactive session, so we'll be looking to you all to share some examples through the chat feature of some of the examples of change that you've been through. I'll be sharing with you a model to appreciate the transitions that people go through during change. Another model that will look at how employees adopt change or change initiatives over time. We'll think about what are some of the factors that we need to consider when designing a change initiative. We'll also then share a case study where we worked with a government organisation and an executive team about how they can better manage their organisation through a time of change. And ultimately, the key message that we hope you take away from the session today is just that change can be more successfully navigated with the power of psychological insight. So let's just have a look at how the workplace has evolved over the last sort of 50 to 70 years. Historically, the organisation was much more of an industrial style organisation where people were regarded as raw materials, kind of core inputs into the process of or in the production of goods and services. We then transitioned to this more hierarchical, organizations that grew, became more sophisticated, they became more international, and along with that, organizations became hierarchical, bureaucratic, and very process oriented. This then started to give way in most cases to the more collaborative workplaces of the 90s, where we had greater focus on being inclusive in our approach. And today, the workplace is more characterized by a flatter structure, and it could be described as having a network of diverse teams. So I might have a quick question for you all, is just if you can think about your own role within an organization today, and how many different workplace teams do you identify with? These might be more permanent teams, such as the one that you find yourselves in or that you manage, or to the leader that you report to. There could be project teams, there could be kind of leadership teams. Just count up for a moment. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing just that number to Kat in the chat box. And Kat, if you don't mind, I'll ask you to just read out some of the numbers that are coming through. So how many workplace teams do you identify with?
Sure. So a few coming through already. Got 3, 14, dozens, 8, 7, 12, another dozens.
Or dozens, great. All right, do we have an increase on dozens? I heard 12, I heard 14. Do we have 15? Do we have 16?
We do have an infinite as well.
Infinite.
An internal consultant, the network of teams is infinite.
Brilliant, okay.
I think that's the winner.
Yeah, it is. That's fantastic. And I mean, I'd love if we're all together and if it kind of was conducive, I'd love for people to share some examples of those different teams, because for some people on the phone, they might be thinking, oh, okay, maybe I don't fully identify with all these different teams that people are kind of working with. It's just if I was to think about kind of where I sit in the world and the kind of work that I do, I have and was to count up my team. So I'm the MD of the Asia Pac business for the Myers-Briggs company. So there's the team here overall that I lead. There's a kind of a sub team, a leadership team. There's another sub team that's more of a commercially focused team around sales, marketing, consulting. There's a global sales leadership team, a global professional services and consulting team, a translations team, a regional leadership team, and if that wasn't enough, I try to involve myself in a lot of the different projects that are going on. So I guess I count up 7 to 9 teams, and that keeps me pretty busy. So I'm amazed by the 14 or the 13, the dozens, and definitely the infinite teams that we're all identifying with. So what does this mean for us all today? Well, clearly, if this is the environment we're working in, so we're working in this network of diverse teams, it means that we're working with a diverse range of people. Some teams might be more longer-term teams, some might be shorter-term teams, scrums. The composition, the dynamics of their teams they're ever-changing. We know that people join teams, leave teams all the time. So the dynamics are ever-changing, and for teams to succeed, we really need to have people who have well-developed interpersonal skills. And the starting point of that really is around self-awareness. And we're definitely going to be touching on that more throughout the presentation today. So if we look further at just some of the changes, interestingly, they're changes that are occurring in the world around us. So between 1999 and 2015, so research showed that around half of the Fortune 500 companies disappeared. So that's amazing. Like some of the largest companies in the world just ceased to exist. Some of them failed, some of them kind of got acquired or merged. But half of these largest organizations disappeared. And one of the, I mean, perhaps as no surprise, one of the key disruptors that have been bringing about this change for organizations is technology. And this chart here looks at the relationship between the rate of change over time, rate of change and what that looks like over time. And we're charting here business productivity, which is that sort of bottom line. And maybe we view this, kind of broadly speaking, as GDP growth. Maybe it's sort of 3 to 5% if we're lucky, and right now that'd be pretty good for many of us. The other line there is looking at the rate of change and advancement in technology, which is kind of growing at this exponential and unprecedented rate. So there are these new technologies, artificial intelligence, which we're going to touch on a little bit, mobile platforms, sensors, social, collaboration, networking. This has all changed the way in which we live and we work, we communicate, and quite fortunately, really, if we think about how we all need to work together right now, and the pace of this change is really is still really accelerating. And unfortunately, business productivity hasn't kept up in many cases with these technological processes. There are some that have, and those organizations we're going to talk more about. They've really been able to grow at really strong rates, but those that haven't, it's really showing there's this kind of gap in potential in terms of what certain businesses may be able to produce. So what we want to have a look at is some of the key workplace trends. There are some of these companies that are succeeding. They do have some similar characteristics, and I think it's useful for us to have a look at those and to think, well, are these things that we can be incorporating into our own organizations so that we are better equipped to grow, to innovate, and to take advantage of some of these new technologies. And these key characteristics we've kind of grouped around company structure, employee orientation, and leader orientation. I'm going to look at how these have changed over time. So if we think about company structure, so many companies of the past and even some today are characterized by these hierarchical structures. They value kind of process, efficiency, and typically they had more homogenous teams, meaning that these are teams where we're comprised of similar types of personalities, people thinking the same way. And that can be a really helpful characteristic if efficiency is the goal, because there's not a lot of conflict, not a lot of change or creativity or challenge. So homogenous teams have that advantage, but efficiency and working in that way, it doesn't really lend itself to a lot of the work that we're needing to do today. We do need to be creative. We do need to be changing and embracing these new changes and new technologies. So today's leading organizations are really, those ones that are growing at those exceptional rates are characterized by structures that are flatter. Their organizations are more mission driven, and they do have this network of diverse teams. So these teams are more diverse, they're heterogeneous, which means that we have different kinds of people, different personalities, thinking in different ways that it can lead to some challenge, it can lead to some conflict, but hopefully, if it well managed, can lead to constructive conflict, which can lead to creativity and to innovation. So one example around this, we can look at probably most of the tech companies, but Google has sort of put out there that they have, and we work with Google too, they have a average ratio of around 30 to 50 employees per manager. 30, I mean, even if we pick the lower number there, 30 employees per manager. So clearly a very flat structure, but how do we do this? I mean, any organization could do this, but whether we would be successful, whether we would thrive in that environment, there's certain characteristics that need to be in place there. And I think that the starting point is that it's a very mission-driven organization. You need to be an organization that is very clear on the values, so the values that you're looking to recruit for, to develop, to champion, to celebrate, and also to manage against. So mission-driven, values-oriented, being able to embrace technology is one way in which organizations can be successfully manage it in a more of a flat way. Another characteristic that describes, or that is common among some of these more successful organizations, is their orientation towards employees. So historically, companies would typically regard their employees as costs, perhaps cogs in the machine, maybe expenses to be minimized. And today, today's leading companies view their employees more as assets that they want to invest in to grow their value. They recognize that it's a competitive market, and it's really that the people who innovate, who create new products, that help organizations to differentiate from their competition. So it's not technology that necessarily differentiates, it's people who then create the technology or can use the technology in new and creative ways that helps organizations differentiate. So we can think about this, about the transition in employee orientation from just even how the personnel department is perhaps now more, that's maybe more an older language, maybe more characterized by these hierarchical organizations. Today, we're hearing language around the talent management departments, people and culture. So it does mean we have a different outlook towards the value of people and culture within organizations. So I think we're pretty fortunate that a lot of the organizations that we work with do have this view. We're kind of engaging with them because they're either on a pathway of wanting to get stronger or develop more of a talent management mindset and capability, or they might be wanting to enhance and develop their talent management capabilities further. And to give you one example around this, one of the companies that we work with, or who uses one of our tools, which is the strong interest inventory. It's a career exploration tool. So this organisation, it's a very, very large online retailer, and they've got a really large warehousing department. And I think what's typical of a lot of warehousing departments is that the employees in that area can be quite transient. There are those who are more lifers, but there are those who kind of have popped into maybe a temporary job. And it'd be very easy not to invest in these employees because it is maybe more of a transient community, but this organisation does. So that they are investing in them by them taking the iStart Strong, a career exploration tool. And what that tool does is it gives them some insights in terms of their vocational and their avocational interests. It gives them insights into their careers that they might be interested in. This helps them become more self-aware in who they are and what might motivate them. And if these employees do move on, this organisation isn't looking at that as a waste of money or investment. In fact, the great thing about it is these people will move on and they're going to look back favourably on that organisation because they took the time to invest in them and value them as people and what they were contributing. The third characteristic we wanted to talk about was leader orientation, and that's where we can see a big difference in organisations. I think this area is something we've been talking about at least for the last 15 years, but I think it's just as relevant, if not more relevant today. So yesterday's companies tended to hire more transactional managers that focused on activities. Promotions tended to be based on hard skills, technical skills, where today's leaders are more transformational, or there are expectations of leaders today, and especially what we're seeing in these more successful organizations. They set the vision, help build the culture, they look to coach people to excellence, and it requires a real focus on developing people who have those capabilities at all levels within an organization. And I think that for me personally, earlier in my career, again, I think this is something we've been talking about for a while. I worked with ANZ early in my career and then GE, and both organizations were very strong in terms of leadership development. I think there was a strong focus on developing those transformational leadership qualities. That's not to say that the transactional management part isn't important. It is part of the job, but we just need to see that there's a much greater focus on trying to win the hearts and minds of talent and shaping team and organizational culture. So once again, those organizations that are succeeding have some common characteristics that we can learn from around how they're structured and the orientation that they have towards their employees and towards their leaders. Just to share one example here, I did mention I used to work in financial services, so I do tend to keep an eye on the industry. And one example I wanted to share with you is from ANZ, and this is perhaps a pre-COVID-19 example, but I think it's just an interesting one to see how a large organisation is looking to become more agile and more innovative in their approach. And so a few years ago, they recognised a need to become more agile, and they restructured their organisation accordingly. They became flatter by removing some layers of management. They started to organise employees in smaller groups of 10, known as squads, that then kind of rolled up into larger tribes. I think they became quite clear in their focus that growth, and this was really about organisational growth, it would come through empowerment and product innovation. And there was a real focus on helping their employees to work in a more inclusive and collaborative way. And this approach, this pathway that ANZ was moving down, it wasn't something which they came up on their own. They actually modelled it off the Dutch financial services provider ING. But ING, they actually picked this up from the music streaming app Spotify. So really interesting just to see how some of the larger companies can still learn and how they can adapt their own organizations based upon learnings from these kind of smaller tech startups. So I might just pause there for a minute and just ask you to think about what are some of the changes that you've experienced in your workplace in the last 10 years. So if you could just write down a couple of notes to Kat, we'll maybe allow a minute for this, Kat, and then if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of the examples that are coming through, just about the different changes we're experiencing in our workplace. And maybe it's right now, but perhaps there might be some more dramatic changes that we experienced 10 years ago.
Okay, a couple are coming through already. Working from home, flexible working, merger into a larger organization, system overhaul, process changes, faster pace due to technology, more contractors are being used. Mm-hmm. Gosh, lots of really good ones coming through, and it's moving my screen so fast I can't read it. It's reorganization, stronger focus on culture and diversity, desk mobility. There's still a lot more coming through, but maybe we pause there, or do you want more?
Always love more, but maybe we'll push on. So thanks for that, everyone, and thanks for that, Kat. One that I didn't hear come through specifically, but it's definitely one I'm hearing more from my clients, is around artificial intelligence. I think it's something which, we've seen its influence in manufacturing and increasingly in professional services, in medicine. And in fact, one of the clients I was working with said they had a board member who was artificial intelligence. So they kind of run all their decisions past the artificial intelligence bot. So very interesting times that we find ourselves living in. So as business leaders, talent development professionals, or whether we're individual employees on the line here today, what does this mean for us in terms of developing people in the workplace? What do we need to succeed in today's and the future workforce? Well, the World Economic Forum put out a paper on the future of jobs, and they identified certain human capabilities that we should be starting to focus on. These are the qualities that organizations will help them to be creative, to differentiate, and perhaps should become the focus of our personal development, or in developing talent more generally. So we can see here we've got things like emotions, creativity, imagination, intuition, ethics, and complex problem solving. So clearly a focus on those softer skills, the interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence is where we need to focus into the future. That's not to say that technology isn't important or technical skills isn't important. It really is. But I think that can change at such a rapid rate that we really need to have some highly differentiated capabilities in these areas because it's going to be critical moving forward. In fact, I might just reference a couple of conversations I've had in this area. One was with a professor of process innovation at a leading business school, and we were talking about this subject and linking it back to artificial intelligence, and he said that artificial intelligence, it doesn't occur on its own. So if we think about the more people-facing artificial intelligence, so that humanoid robots, as an example, or maybe even chatbots, their acceptance for us all in working with them or engaging with them, it comes from, or the level of acceptance comes from the people who are designing these, who are writing the scripts for this technology, to have well-developed people skills, well-developed emotional intelligence. They need to know what it's like to really interact with people well, and then be able to translate that into code. And he also mentioned that we need to have good ethics too. So the people who are writing the scripts, who are writing the code for artificial intelligence, need to have well-developed ethics to make sure that artificial intelligence isn't misused. Another related conversation I had just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with Sarah McCann Bartlett from ARI. She's the new CEO at ARI, and we're having a bit of a chat about the current change we find ourselves all in. And I asked her, are there any messages that she would like to get out there for for human resources and business leaders today, and she said she really encourages us all to build our self-awareness. So that's going to be really key for helping us to have resilience and to better navigate through change. But interestingly, I thought what I thought was interesting was that she also talked about the need to develop deep skills in digital and analysis. And she said, technology is still going to be really important, and encourages us to look at our roles and see how we can start to use artificial intelligence to improve it. What are some of the more manual tasks that we can automate or remove through artificial intelligence, and to see people to focus on the higher value activities that are going to really help differentiate organizations. If we focus more at the leadership level, Deloitte have talked a bit about the symphonic C-suite, and I guess the idea here is that leaders don't operate in silos, and sometimes we do see that occur in organizations. And I think this is even more true today, and even more needed today. I think that one of our reactions to stress and to change can be to kind of shut down a bit, and maybe to develop some more silo-based thinking. But again, now more than ever, we do need to recognize that the landscape is dynamic. We need to maybe not have such long-term plans. We need to have kind of more dynamic short-term plans, and bring leaders together and really help them to be their best in how they do work together. So we might take a slightly different tack now. We've spoken a bit about change today, some of the characteristics of successful organizations and some of the qualities that we need in people. I thought we might have a bit of a chat about some of the practical elements involved in implementing change, and that'll move us into a case study. So this here is sort of a pretty basic model or example of how we might expect people adopt to a change over time. So on the bottom axis there, we can see time. Vertically, we can see really the percentage of employees who adopt the change. We might think that, look, over time, everyone will eventually get on board with the change. But the reality of change is much different to that. And this graphic here probably is something that we might more typically experience. I think that we can see that initially, when we're approached with change, it can seem quite daunting. We might not see the kind of the end state and what that means for us personally, what it means for the organization. And then as we kind of move through, we might get to a point where, yes, we've kind of been through some of the heavy lifting here. We kind of understand how this is going to impact us in the organization. And maybe we have some more confidence, and we feel a little safer about what's about to happen. But then as we kind of go through and the change continues, often there might be not just a single change, but multiple changes occurring all at once. And I think this is something that I'm sure everyone on the line has experienced. There might be a structural change. There might be a new technology. There could be a new customer-facing system, plus a new financial system at the same time, plus a new CEO and different focus on values and vision. So there really can be a lot that we ask everyone within organizations to really kind of come to terms with quite quickly. So change can be quite daunting. But I think we can also appreciate that people do have different reactions through change. Some will enjoy it, some will find it daunting, some will have questions about, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my colleagues, my friends? Questions about the technology. So there's going to be a combination of reactions depending upon where we sit in an organization and who we are and what our personalities are. So if we think back to that adoption curve, what we typically experience when it comes to change is that, look, the percentage of people that get on board change, it can be initially quite a small amount over time, and eventually over time, perhaps we do get more and more on board, but maybe not everyone is fully bought into the change, and maybe not everyone stays around to experience the change either. Just a question for the group. Research suggests that on average 70% of organisational change initiatives fail, or they do not result in sustained change. So why is that? Any examples? If you wouldn't mind kind of writing down a couple of examples as to why change fails. And Kat, if you wouldn't mind reading those out.
Okay, so some coming through now. Follow through and follow up. A lack of focus on the people side of change.
Yeah. Planning,
vision, lack of engagement, not enough communication. There's more coming through. Poor messaging, not sustaining the focus after implementation, understanding the why. Several others as well.
All right, a lot of very personal examples coming through. So thank you. I'm sure we've all had a lot of experience with change. This here is a model that I think probably groups together and maybe adds to some of those examples that came through. So there are some tangible factors that can impact change on the left-hand side, and there can be intangible aspects. So there are some of the more tangible aspects, things like the goals, were the goals relevant? Were they achievable? Is the structure appropriate to support the change? Sometimes change fails because of technology or systems aren't kind of aligned to support the new vision or the new direction that the organisation is heading in. Capabilities aren't developed, the products, services aren't right, and so on. So there can be these tangible things which occur at an organisational level, but then more at a more personal level too. So things around the location of employees, the remuneration benefits, the incentive plans, changing in job responsibilities and focus. So there are definitely some core structural pieces that need to be aligned to be able to support change or to support the successful implementation of change. But I think what we tend to hear more of is, I think people talk a lot about the tangible and can see the tangible. Sometimes it's the intangible that really does sort of get in the way. And these are some of the softer things that perhaps came through. So the culture of the organisation, has that been, if the organisation was perhaps more of a process-oriented, inward-looking kind of quality organisation, and then a new CEO comes in and wants to flip things around to become more agile, more innovative, has the culture been developed to support that? Has the leadership been developed to support that? Employee engagement, have employees been brought along the journey to be able to kind of buy into this? So that's at the more organizational level. If we think about it at a personal level, people's individual commitment, their relationship with the company, their rewards, kind of built-in or built-up rewards that they might have, whether there are changes there. Personality can also have an influence too, and what my needs are during times of change. Have I been communicated in the way I like to receive communication? Has change been explained to me in a way that makes sense according to my personality? So personality will have a big impact on how we experience change. So do people hate change? Well, the answer is no, not really. If we think about it, we all travel, we renovate. Well, we're not traveling a hell of a lot at the moment, but when we can, I mean, I think we've just seen around many parts of the world that as the social distancing restrictions ease up, people are kind of trying to get out there on their holidays and go have a new experience. Other changes we make, we might renovate our homes, redecorate. We try to improve ourselves through going to the gym or reading books. We change fashion, change our hair, change relationships. We change political leaders from time to time. So we change things all the time. So we do like change. We are kind of driven to change, but we don't like change that's occurring to us. So there are different kinds of change. There's imposed change. So this is when a change is imposed upon us. And when this occurs for employees, the change might seem sudden, it might seem abrupt, can create problems for me, disrupt my routines, my procedures, and can lead to demotivation, resistance, and resentment. So yeah, this is often what will happen within organizations, and why a lot of change fails is because for most of the people, really most people, except for perhaps the senior leaders who are driving the change, for those who are having the change imposed upon them and they haven't been included as part of the process, haven't had a chance to shape it, it can be quite personally challenging. But if we're the one who is driving the change, if we are the people who are intentionally making the change, and typically this is more true for decision makers, it's something which is more conscious, more considered, it solves problems, it might be exciting and provide an opportunity, can lead to that motivation, energy, and commitment. So in our personal lives, when we have the ability to make those changes, then again, it can be a really exciting thing for us and motivating thing for us. In organizations, leaders have often or senior leaders, executive leaders might have had 6 months, a year, 18 months where they're kind of working through the change that they're wanting to implement. They've had a lot of time to get their head around it. It makes sense. They can see what it means for them personally. But because they haven't brought in the large organization, the larger organization is, again, feeling it as more of an imposed change. So I think that's interesting for us to reflect on, about how we can bring people into the process more. So it's feeling less like an imposed change and more of an intentional change, something that we've got a bit more control over and involvement in. Now, this here is a model just to keep in mind, I think, in understanding the psychological journey that people go through during change or during a transition. And this has been put together by William Bridges. He says that really any kind of change that we go through, initially there's going to be some kind of ending. So what was in place, maybe it was a certain structure, certain technology, certain location that we were in, that whatever that was, that's coming to an end, and we should acknowledge and accept, understand, and grieve the loss that it is a loss that people are going to be experiencing. We should take time to celebrate that old reality because it served people, it served the organization for some time, and maybe there is a reason to change that now, but I think we need to appreciate that people will have a strong emotional connection with emotional, but also maybe a practical connection with the world that they're moving away from. We then find ourselves in this sort of neutral zone as we're kind of moving through the change. So we're clear about what's been lost. Maybe the future state's not fully understood. We don't really know what it means for us and those who we care about. Our expectations are in flux. We might be confused, skeptical. Our motivation might drop too during this change process. Then eventually we're going to move to the new beginning. So what is this new reality for people? And ideally, if well managed, people will start to accept what has changed. We're going to learn the new skills and start to identify with this new world, feel more motivated, and have a greater sense of belief about the future. So I think a key message here is just to recognize that along with change, there is a psychological journey that people will go through, especially if change is being imposed upon them. So to successfully manage change, and if we're wanting to start to kind of reduce or increase, I should say, increase the number of people who are kind of getting on board with the change and sooner, the way we do that is to respond to the psychology of those involved. And what that means is to close this gap we need to really pay attention to some of these intangible factors that do get in the way of change being implemented successfully. So all those things around culture, leadership, personality, values, what can really help here at an organization level and a personal level is to build things like self-awareness, communication needs, helping people understand their decision-making preferences, helping people understand their levels of resilience, how they respond to change, how they can be agile at an employee level and a leadership level too. So there are a lot of factors there on the right-hand side, but if there are some kind of core factors there, if we can think about building these into our people development programs during change, this can help us close the gaps. We get a greater level of adoption to the change sooner. So in terms of the benefits, so one way in which we do this is through assessments. Assessments are a really great way to help us build self-awareness. So assessments can be objective, they're quick, so within a short space of time, half an hour, 90 minutes, we can get some really powerful insights, objective insights in terms of who we are and perhaps the people who we're working with, what motivates us, what we need, what our communication preferences are, as an example. And I think one of the real benefits of assessments is that they often give us models or a language for understanding these intangible things that we're experiencing, things that are going on in our minds or different experiences we're having interpersonally. So it gives us a way to put a language or a model around these things. So it becomes more tangible, gives us a greater sense of understanding and control. As I mentioned, it helps us understand others and can give us some insights for development and help us to prioritize our learning and development. So some of you might have had the opportunity to go through a leadership assessment before, and I thought I might give everyone a chance to do that now. So I'll just ask you to look at these 4 different shapes and to think about kind of who you naturally are at your core. So think less about how you behave at work, think about who you naturally are at your core and which one of these shapes kind of resonates more strongly with you. So I'll just give you a few seconds to think about that. There might be 1 or 2 that are kind of resonating more strongly. If you can kind of land on one. All right, now if we're all together, I'd ask you to raise your hands just so we see the distribution of this around the room. But as I look to reveal now, so for those of you who have maybe identified with the square, this typically represents leaders who have they're more intelligent leaders. They like to bring their intellect to solving problems. Then we have the triangle, which are more lateral thinkers, people who are prepared to look at all sides. The Z, so these tend to be the noisier people in the group, noisier leaders, so they're dynamic people gatherers and motivators. And then the circle there, well, that's a different kind of leadership style altogether. So is this a valid assessment of leadership? No, absolutely not. And unfortunately, all too often, people take assessments which look a little bit like this. They're very proud of their shape and they might proudly take their Z or their circle and put it at their cubicle in the office saying, I'm a circle leader, or I'm a square leader. But unfortunately, no, there's been no research to demonstrate that any of these shapes have anything predictive in terms of leadership style. So when using assessments, we do need to accept there are some challenges. Some assessments are simply inadequate. They might be developed on irrelevant samples or insufficient samples. There might not be much research behind them at all. It's interesting, it's got all the latest buzzwords and language there, but it can actually be a little dangerous to use them because people can take assessments seriously, and they should if they're administered well, but can give people some very misleading insights. Sometimes assessments Now, sometimes people might have access to assessment, but they might use the wrong assessment for the wrong purpose. So we have an example of an organisation that was using a 360 with their senior leaders, and it was a great 360, really well constructed, measured all the right competencies. They let us know they'd been given approval to roll out a talent development program with more individual contributors, and they wanted to use the same assessments. They were using a personality tool, a interpersonal tool, and a 360. The personality and the interpersonal style tool were very relevant for the talent development group. The 360, on the other hand, wasn't. It didn't measure the right sets of competencies. So we do need to think about what is the assessment really measuring? What is it designed to be used for? And is it fit for purpose? We need to make sure that the people who are using the tools are qualified and understand what they mean, but also what they don't mean, and can also bring in other sources of information to be able to add to the interpretation and debrief. An example of that might be understanding the cultural context and any limitations or considerations in using tools in different cultural environments. And I think our final point on assessments is that probably don't do them if we're not going to follow them through. Assessments are really great. They can be really powerful, but the idea is that it's going to be the start of a journey for individual development. So we do want to be able to support people with some ongoing development once they've identified some development areas. In terms of the world of assessments, there's many different kinds of assessments out there. And it really is about trying to find the right one for the right purpose. And I think one way in which we look at them here at the Myers-Briggs companies in terms of how confronting they can be for people to go through. All assessments have a place, but sometimes if you dive in too deep too early, such as with a 360, if people aren't ready to go through a 360, if they're not self-aware enough or emotionally mature enough, then it can be quite devastating for individuals, or people might simply reject the information. So what's better is to go through tools that are less confronting, help people build their sense of self-awareness, understand some of their personality preferences and interpersonal needs, can move through to other more normative tools that look to compare us against other people and to see our levels of certain kind of drivers or emotional intelligence. But 360s, I think, are really powerful tools, but they can be quite confronting. So we want to build, if we're going to use a 360 as part of, say, a leadership development exercise, we want to layer in other assessment insights first. So just to share with you a quick case study of an organisation who we helped through some change. So this was a government organisation. They had around 200 people, and it was a kind of an independent agency. And they'd recently gone through a restructure, and at the same time there was a kind of a government-wide climate survey that was rolled out, and the feedback that came back to the leadership team and to the board, they had a board, this government agency, was quite negative. It revealed a lot of issues around a lack of clarity around the new mission. They felt that the executive team had kind of a lack of cohesion. There were these silos that were forming. They felt that the exec team weren't consultative, weren't inclusive with the broader organisation, that there was maybe a lack of transparency around certain recruitment decisions, and there wasn't a focus on developing people, especially through this change. So the focus for our work with this organisation was to help people develop a greater understanding and commitment to the mission, improve the leadership capabilities of the executive team, improve the relationships between the executive and also their relationships with the employees, and provide development opportunities for all staff. So we started to look at it and to think about, okay, what are the factors affecting change? What are the factors we need to consider at an organisation level and also at the people level? So we started to map these out. It was clear that some of the strategy was unclear to people. There was a change in structure, but the culture hadn't been developed to support the new strategy, and leadership perhaps was effective for the former structure and the former mission, but hadn't really been developed to be able to support the new direction. At a more personal level, people had a change in roles and responsibilities, structural changes that people were unclear about, and that led to people having lower levels of commitment, and they felt, I guess, a little dejected that their personality needs weren't being addressed as they're going through this change process. So in terms of the solution, it was about, again, how do we get more people adopting this change? And we went about kind of defining with the executive team, what were some of the learning objectives? What are the learning objectives we have for the leaders? And what are some of the learning objectives we have for employees at both an executive or organizational level and at a more personal level? So if we think about it maybe as a start at the personal level, we want to help people commonly across the organization build an understanding of themselves, so develop that sense of self-awareness, build resilience. We want the leaders to build a greater sense of leadership agility. And then in terms of those capabilities across the organization, it's about not understanding myself, but it's about having a model to understand and appreciate difference, to understand my colleagues, understand my employees, get to be better at communicating, to support people, better at supporting others through change and conflict and helping to build team effectiveness. So again, a practical consideration, and this is maybe a quick question to the group. So who do you start with? So we've gone through, there's 200 people in the organization. There's we kind of mapped out what our learning objectives are. We now want to build a program and start to roll that out, but you can't on day one just roll a program out to 200 people. Where do you start? Kind of what should be, who should we be bringing in early into the change process? So quick question there for the audience, and Kat, if you could read back any responses that come through.
So all the frontline staff, sponsor, CEO, executive group, stakeholders.
Great.
And executives again. Yep.
All righty. So yeah, absolutely. This here, I think, is a useful model to keep in mind. Again, just from a practical point of view in terms of how we execute change. So people in the organization might vary in terms of on the bottom there, their level of influence. So if they have low levels of influence or high levels of influence across the organization. And on the left-hand side, what their level of resistance is. Do they have a low level of resistance, meaning they're supporting the change, or do they have a high level of resistance and they're kind of actively disengaged? So the starting point really is, what's best is to start off with the champions. So these are people who have high levels of influence, they have low levels of resistance. These will typically be executives, leaders in the organization, maybe not all of them. In fact, some of the leaders might be resistors. They've got some real problems with the change. But so what we want to be doing is to bring the champions on board early. Those people have high levels of influence and low levels of resistance. And we also want to address the resistors too, because they have a lot of influence and could be actively campaigning against the change. So a good way to deal with the resistors is to get the champions to kind of tackle them. Bring them in, communicate, talk about how change affects them personally, and looking at things through different perspectives. So we do want to try to neutralize those resistors early and convert them into champions. And often it is a case of communication. Next step, it can then be good to bring on that critical mass, people who have less influence, but are maybe more generally supportive of the change, and then eventually that late majority will eventually come on board once kind of the majority of people do. So when you are looking to tackle change, if you're a small team, project team, you can't do it all yourself. It is about leveraging those champions first and helping them to support you in rolling the change out across the organization. So this is something we did in this example or this case study here. And so we did do a lot of work with the executive team to bring them on board with the change process and to use them to support the rollout of the change. We designed a series of modules for all employees across the organization, so the executive team, middle management team, and the broader employee group. There were some common modules that everyone went through at a personal level, which was about building our sense of self-awareness through using a model of personality, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And also to help people understand change and how personality can impact how we embrace change or how we might lead change. We then looked at building those capabilities across the organization. So how do I personally lead across the organization, lead others, or as an employee, how do I better relate to people within my team and across the organization? So again, we had modules that looked at a focus on building an awareness and understanding and appreciation of others' needs, and did some team development work and kind of more strategy development work with the leadership group. So I've referenced that we have used personality a few times. I've referenced personality a few times during this presentation or during this case study. It's something we use in this program, and we use in a lot of programs because personality is looking at our innate ways of how we think, feel, and act on most occasions. It helps us understand how we're motivated, how we tend to communicate, make decisions. It will give us insights around our leadership style too. In this particular example, we use the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Some of you might be familiar with the assessment. It's been around for over 70 years. It's used around by about 90% of the Fortune 100 companies. A reason for its high utilization is because it's one of these low confrontation tools. It really is quite well accepted and quite rewarding to go through. It gives people some useful insights in terms of team and leadership, conflict and change. And it just, at the end of the day, it's giving people a common language to comfortably explore differences and appreciate differences with those around them. How it's kind of practically useful is that based upon our personalities, we all have different ways in which we're going to want to engage with change. So in terms of how we'll want to experience change, how we want to be communicated through change, and how we might engage with others too. So it's quite helpful in that way to have this practical model for helping us design a change program. So to provide an example, the first dichotomy of the Myers-Briggs tool is around extroversion and introversion. So based upon our personality preferences for each of these areas, we'll have different communication needs. So those who prefer extroversion will be energized by interacting with others. They're more sociable and expressive, prefer to communicate by talking. They like to work out their ideas by talking them through. Those who prefer introversion are going to be more energized by the opportunity to reflect, are more private and contained, prefer to communicate in writing, and like to work out their ideas by reflecting on them. An activity that we will sometimes talk through relating to extroversion and introversion is about if we're going to move an office to a new location, how would we want others to communicate with us, and what communication approach maybe would not work for us. And what typically gets shared at this time is those who prefer extroversion will tend to want to be or have the opportunity to talk about the change. town hall meetings, small groups, forums in which they can hear from others, ask questions. That tends to be a form of communication that works quite well, being able to walk around the site and chat to other people around it. That's a great way for extroverts to be able to understand the change. What typically doesn't work is maybe email communication on its own, or kind of one-on-one communication isn't quite enough for extroverts. They kind of like to hear what others share. It kind of helps to, or have to say it helps inform their own views. And introverts, on the other hand, what we'll often hear from introverts is that they typically might like an email communication followed up with some one-on-one communication from their manager, or small group communication once they've had an agenda and they've had a chance to prepare for that conversation. What typically doesn't work is more large group approaches, because they don't often have, there's often a lot of different views that are shared, and it's maybe harder for them to kind of focus on some of the issues that are most important to them, or have their voices heard. Personality is also helpful in giving us insights in terms of our natural approach to leading through change, but also our followership style too. So we're all born with an innate preference to lead in a certain way, and it also aligns with how we want to be led. And in terms of the Myers-Briggs model, it's the last two letters. So these relate to our decision-making preferences and how we like to work with the outside world. So our typical leadership styles and followership styles kind of relate to these last two letters. So TJ leaders, thinking and judging, they tend to appreciate structure, decision, action, might appear more confident, consistent. TP, thinking, perceiving leaders, they tend to like to use their expertise, high standards, a bit more hands-off, more flexible in their approach. FJ, feeling, judging, more values-based, inclusive, loyal, and look to consider others. And FP, feeling and perceiving. They'll tend to take the views of others, again, more flexible, taking more of a coaching and encouragement type approach. So based upon an understanding of personality and our personality type, the last two letters will give us insights to our natural approach for leading and our natural approach for following. And in this, back to the case example, what we found was, because we took everyone through the MBTI, the majority of the leadership team had a TJ approach to leadership. And the majority of the employees had more of an FP approach to followership, or the kind of leadership that they were looking for. So there was a strong kind of contrast between the natural leadership style of the leaders and what the employees were wanting to receive and to hear. So this kind of gave some insights in terms of the issues that were raised at the start around the climate survey results. Feeling like there was more of a bullying style and lack of inclusiveness, and lack of opportunities for personal development. It really kind of came down to a difference in personalities. And that doesn't mean that we can't change our behaviors, but it's just a great starting point for us to learn how we need to be flexible as leaders and as employees too. As leaders, if we can learn that our personality preferences may be TJ, could be any of these four preferences, but by having a model for appreciating these differences, we can then start to develop greater flexibility in the different leadership characteristics we might display. So in wrapping up the case study, ultimately it was a really successful intervention. I wouldn't have shared the example otherwise, most likely. So it rolled for about, it was implemented over about 18 months, 12 to 18 months, and the climate survey kind of rolled out again, and all the ratings were moving in a more positive direction. The executive team were pleased with the work and what they were learning about themselves. They wanted some ongoing development. The organisation, it had been commercially very successful and continued to do so. And the independent board also wanted to have a chance to go through an MBTI development experience, because everyone else had been through it, they wanted to go through it too. So as part of the next steps, we had done a lot of work with the leadership, with everyone around Myers-Briggs. We then focused more with the leaders around their leadership style, looking at an interpersonal tool called FIRO. And we also gave them a deep dive into their leadership competencies by going through a 360-degree feedback assessment called benchmarks. We supported them with team development workshops, individual coaching as well, to really help them consolidate their change. So as we look to wrap up the session today, this is a couple of key takeaways. So in terms of the psychology of change, we want to recall that those organizations that are successful at embracing change, they have some common things that we can learn from in terms of their structure, the orientation they have towards their employees and leaders, and developing those. We want to think about the psychology of people and what they experience when they go through change, that we'll go through this transition of endings to new beginnings. So we do want to be mindful of that and find ways to support people through that. We also want to appreciate that change is personal and that helping people to understand themselves and others using validated psychological assessments can really help. And ultimately, that change should be more successfully navigated with the benefit of psychological insight. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Kat.
Great. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you all again for joining the webinar today. Cameron presented an overview of different models for managing organizational change. And as we know, getting individuals and teams on board with change initiatives is essential to the success of the project. So helping individuals, teams, and leaders with this process can require more in-depth training and development than what we're able to cover in a short webinar. We are happy to schedule a free consultation to discuss your specific questions and challenges with Cameron or another one of our experienced consultants. And we'll also be taking questions in a few moments, which you can submit through the questions box on your side panel. And while we wait for those to come through, I'll talk about our company, including some new resources for virtual teams. So for those of you that are new to the Myers-Briggs company, we work with our clients in a few different ways. We offer consulting services where one of our experienced trainers like Cameron can get to know your organization and design and deliver a customized solution to meet your business requirements. We can also partner with you and be as involved in your projects as you want us to be, whether that's co-facilitating or helping you behind the scenes with designing your programs or workshops. Or if you want to manage all aspects of design and delivery yourself, you can join our certification programs to gain the knowledge and tools that you need to build those capabilities internally. If you want us to manage your people development programs, we can offer customized solutions designed to address your specific challenges and help you achieve your desired outcomes. We also have off-the-shelf virtual team building workshops available that can help intact teams improve collaboration and team effectiveness with different modules for increasing self-awareness, enhancing communication, navigating change, and building resilience. And to manage your own people development programs using our assessments, we do offer certification training and a range of tools that support the entire talent lifecycle, including the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which Cameron mentioned, as well as emotional intelligence tools, leadership 360s, and talent selection tools. To learn more about our assessments and services, our website's a really great place to start, myers-briggs.com. I would like to call special attention to our web pages with resources for developing your virtual workforce. You can get to it from our homepage by clicking on the second banner, which looks like the one pictured on the screen, to navigate to the virtual workforce pages, which include more information on the virtual team building workshops, virtual practitioner development, and complementary resources as well, such as tip sheets, quick guides, infographics, and additional upcoming complimentary webinars to attend. Our next free webinar will be on July 15th, and it's on the topic of maintaining resilience in a virtual world, which will be facilitated by Dr. Martin Bolt, who is our Senior Director of Professional Services at the Myers-Briggs Company. So you can find that on our website and register online. Again, it's free to attend. For today's webinar, we will be sending the slides and recording to each of you by tomorrow. You'll also receive a link to a very brief online survey in the next hour, which should just take 2 minutes to complete, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on the webinar today. So now let's turn to questions, and a few have come through. The first one, Cameron, is with so many people working from home now, what can we do? What can we be doing to develop employees, and what should we prioritize?
Great, thanks, Kat. Thanks everyone for your time today, and thanks for these questions starting to come through. In terms of working from home, I think there's a few things. I mean, it really does depend upon the challenges that your organisation is facing right at the moment. Some of the clients who we've been working with have talked about that need for connection. So we're all kind of working remotely. We might be catching up from time to time, but they're still finding a need to kind of want to bring people together and to learn more about people individually, and also to see how we can kind of support the team. So I think connection is really useful and important right now, but there are some other common themes coming through around change and resilience and communication preferences too.
Great. Do you have any suggestions for change in large organizations where assessments can't be done for all employees? Maybe assessments just for key managers? Any suggestions?
Any suggestions? Yeah, look, I think in large organizations, I mean, definitely as a starting point, I think the leadership group is a great group to work with, because you're going to want them to become more self-aware, understand their natural leadership style, understand having a model for appreciate differences in others, learning how to flex their leadership style. And Myers-Briggs is a great place to start, but depending upon the needs of the organisation and what they're facing. So combining that with an emotional intelligence assessment or a 360 can be also really quite powerful. And more often than not, I think once leaders see the value in that personal insight and how it's helped them to better tackle change and to develop as leaders, that can often see support kind of roll out across the organisation. But actually, that's one, and that's probably the most common approach. There are some organisations we've worked with where it's a really large organisation, and it's kind of been more of a bottom-up approach. And what's happened is that the kind of the talent development team have got on board a champion, maybe a mid-level manager or a senior manager, and started to roll it out in one area, doing some team development work. And what's happened is that as that's been rolled out and as it's been supported and people have seen the success of that, the process kind of continues to mobilize, and people say, well, I want to do that too. So and then more and more teams kind of get involved. So it can be often, I think it's great if it can be top down, but you can do more of a bottom up or sideways approach too, where that kind of support can mobilize through a demonstration of the effectiveness of using the tool. But again, you probably want to pick a champion when you're wanting to roll that out.
Great, thanks, Cameron.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to the case study, how long did it take to implement that program?
Yeah, it overall, so initially there was sort of, it was about 12 months that we kind of rolled out to across the entire organization, and everyone went through a development experience. And then it's probably another 6 months that we spent more with the executive team doing a deeper dive into their leadership competencies. It's about 18 months overall for that engagement.
Thanks. Another question, are there any tips that you have or insights for engaging resistant leaders in the data and psychological science of change? So for example, working with large government agencies or departments that have traditional hierarchical structures and fixed mindsets and predominantly technical managers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so I think the starting point is probably to look at myself as an individual and to be aware of my own strengths, my own biases, my own preferences around communication. And it could be that if I'm I'm not sure who the question's from, but if I'm maybe more of a talent development professional looking to influence some more technically minded leaders, it might be that my personality preferences and my communication style is a little bit different to those of some of the leaders or the technical leaders in the organization. So being aware of my natural strengths, but also my blind spots, can be helpful in thinking about how do I need to tailor my communication style or my approach to those leaders. I might not necessarily know their personality preferences, but if at least I'm aware of my own blind spots, I can I can be more informed and more flexible in terms of how I look to communicate with different audiences. So yeah, and you're not going to know, so you kind of need to be prepared. You're going to want to think about some of the bigger picture issues around communication, so strategy, where the organization's headed, maybe some of the issues around mission and values, but then also some technical information too. What does this mean for the individuals in their team? What are the costs? What are the time involvement? Are there some metrics that you can draw upon in terms of turnover or climate survey results? So if you don't know the other person's communication preferences, then you kind of need to be equipped with at least understanding your own preferences, and to build a presentation that's going to maybe potentially tick all the boxes. That'd be my recommendation there.
Great, and probably along the same lines, a sort of similar question, but how can you encourage leaders to flex in order to accommodate people's reactions to change?
Yeah, look, I think it comes down to I think initially, I think a lot of people will think that, look, isn't everyone just like me? Doesn't everyone want to receive communication the same way that I do? Do people want to be led the same way that I am? And that can often be a lot of people's starting point. And this is where I think having certain models can be really useful, and just to show that, look, no, actually there are different approaches here. And you might have a strength or a preference around one, but for you to be successful, it is really about meeting the psychological needs of your team. And to do that, you do need to have a greater flexibility in your style. And I think some individual coaching work can start to bring out maybe some challenges that leaders have had, and they've all had them. Different personality, different employees, different personalities, and maybe even their own experience as an employee, different leadership styles that have worked and haven't worked. So I think models can be helpful, assessments can be helpful to show people where they fall in relation to those models, and then some more in-depth individual work to help them really kind of crystallize that and embed that, and to develop that commitment to develop and change.
Great. And another question about our company in particular: what simple steps has the Myers-Briggs company taken to foster ongoing connection while working remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's lots of different teams. Locally, we've had, we do have a couple of catch-up meetings each week, so just all employees, and we have, so we just try to get everyone when we can together, and it's both a kind of a professional get-together, to kind of share what's going on, but also a personal get-together too. So we've tried to maintain that sense of connection and some of the relationship stuff that we develop around the office. So just, what are people watching on their different streaming services at the moment? Are there any recommendations? How are we trying to keep fit and active when we weren't able to get out so much? So yeah, a bit of the business stuff, but also a bit of the personal stuff, but making sure we're trying to connect and trying to use the video catch-ups whenever we can. That's kind of in more individual teams, and then there are some broader company updates that we all attend to. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. I will say the video catch-ups are nice to keep that connection while working remotely, so I've enjoyed the video.
Well, in our last one, our finance manager, he just received a delivery of new running shoes, and he proudly kind of got them and showed them, and that's a bit of fun. Anyway, so I think we've all explored a bit of online shopping too. So it's been fun, just a different insight into our worlds.
Cool. And I know we just have a few more minutes left, so there's one more question that I'll bring up here, and if we didn't get to your question, we will be following up individually to just make sure we do address all the questions that you have. So last question for you, Cameron, how would these concepts about change management be applied in an environment with rapid cycles of change, like a startup company?
Oh yeah, great question. Look, I think it's even, I mean, it's important regardless of the size of the organization, but in startups where maybe these are organizations that are moving quicker, then I think it's even more important that people, people need to have some really well-developed interpersonal skills. We need to be really self-aware. I think to do some in-depth individual work, team development work, understand our leadership preferences, our communication preferences, decision-making preferences, the strengths and blind spots we have as individuals or us in relation to a team. I think having a good understanding of that just helps teams move even quicker. It helps move through some of the interpersonal stuff, some of the conflict, make sure that conflict is constructive. And yeah, I think it can lead to really energizing and exciting environments. But that can come from building trust, which the starting point of building trust comes from building that self-awareness.
Great, thanks, Cameron. And again, apologies if we didn't get to your question. We will be following up individually to make sure that we do address all of your questions. We'll also be sending out the slides and recording tomorrow. So if any additional questions arise between now and then, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We're happy to chat with you further. So again, thank you all for joining the webinar today, and thank you, Cameron, for your presentation.
Great, thank you, everyone, and thanks a lot for Kat for hosting. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.